Welcome to the Data Literacy Show, the podcast that helps organizations build, measure, and level up their data and AI literacy.
I'm Ben Jones, co-founder and CEO of Data Literacy, where we help people learn the language of data and AI through tailored training and assessments.
Yes, and I'm Alli Torban, the Senior Data Literacy Advocate here at Data Literacy. On today's show, we're talking about how you can make better data stories by turning it into an iterative process. We're going to share our impact framework and how to incorporate testing into each part of the process.
All right, this is exciting. So if you have ever built a data story that didn't quite land, or if you've waited until the very end to get feedback only to realize your message missed the mark, then this episode's for you.
Right. That I am definitely guilty of that.
Same.
Or if you need to create a data story and you don't even know where to start, the impact framework is actually going to be really great help for you too, because it maps out every step. And the big thing with the impact framework is that you are creating a data story in a process that's not linear. So whenever I have created a data story, my process is very cyclical and iterative. So the impact framework is based on that. And I am also constantly testing and going back and refining what I've already worked on.
And this whole framework you developed, Alli, it's really kind of inspired by agile software development, right? Tell us a bit about that.
Right. Yeah. So in my early career, I was a software tester and we used an agile process. And really all it is, all very high level, is you're not waiting until the end of the software development lifecycle to get feedback. You test as you go and you're constantly improving, talking to the client, getting feedback. And we'll link in the show notes a link about agile if you're interested in more details about that process. But the impact framework took inspiration from that because it's iterative and we're doing small tests at every step.
Yeah, and I can definitely see why, that totally applies to data storytelling or creating one. I mean, I'm thinking back to my own career and I've been in, the situation from time to time where, I put a ton of time into working on some presentation. And then I realized maybe after the fact that what I've presented isn't quite what my audience wanted or needed, or it was maybe missing some major points that I really could have or should have made. And I could have even caught that point earlier, maybe if I had, tested it little by little along the way.
I know. It's so smart to be constantly checking, making sure you're right on the right path, right? Like you do a lot of hiking, you're constantly checking, am I still on the path? I haven't wandered out,
sometimes
right?
a little too much checking, but yeah.
Yeah, you can save time and you dramatically increase your chances of creating a successful data story when you are constantly testing along the way. And by success, I mean, did the data story achieve what you wanted it to achieve? So it's important to talk about that up front. You either want your audience to make a decision, maybe they're taking an action, or maybe just to fully understand a situation.
Yeah, you really do have to define that, upfront right away, because then that really is going to inform each little step of this impact framework you've put together for us. So, let's talk about that. This impact framework, well, impact is an acronym, and there are phases. Impact, we start with insight, then we go to message, plan, align, clarify, and test. IMPACT.
And it does sound linear when you say it like that, because, you do have to list it out. But we've set it up where you actually complete one phase and then test.
That's the T, right? So the T comes in.
So first time you find your insight and then you test.
Test the insight, just the insight.
Yeah, just the insight. And then you go to the next step, insight, message, test. And then each time you're adding a step, testing, and also during that iteration you're revisiting the previous steps because it's likely you're going to need to make edits on something you did previously based on the feedback you got during testing.
Yeah, sort of like mini tests, micro adjustments. Sometimes big adjustments based on, I guess, the kind of feedback. Maybe you find out you need to start all over. But with each of these little tests you do, you can make that adjustments. You can make that adjustment early so that you're not going to get so far down the road and waste effort. You're going to basically increase your chances of crafting a relevant data story, of really hitting it out of the park. So let's talk a little bit more about, what's involved with maybe each step And then, Allie, you can give us a suggestion on how you would test at that specific phase.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's go.
Okay, cool. So let's do it. So first we have insight. So this is all about identifying, what data sets are you working with, what metrics are involved, maybe what charts sort of are already available and exist. And from that, you brainstorm the insight that you've gleaned. This is sort of what is the nugget or the aha that you're trying to capture and convey.
Right. Yeah. It's really important to get organized and prioritize all your data at the beginning. And maybe you enter this already knowing your insight, but sometimes you do need to organize all the data you have, all the charts. Where are you starting out? We don't want to just throw a ton of data at our audience just because we have it, right? That's not good data communication. So when you do have an insight or two that's worth sharing, in order to test it, I would find some sort of colleague, maybe a stakeholder, someone who might be in your audience later for the data story, or even a subject matter expert about your chosen insight. And there are a few questions I am looking to ask them. What context might I be missing with this insight? I tell you. Could there be any other explanations? Is this insight clear? Do you think it would lead to whatever decision or action that I'm hoping for? And then you can use whatever feedback that they have to maybe go back and get another data set, or maybe you're fine with the insight you have. But a lot of times people look at things from a different angle and they'll bring their expertise and ask you a question that maybe you didn't consider, and you might need to tweak your insight a bit.
Yeah, so it's almost like you're testing that so what up front. So
Yeah.
here's your key insight, and the person really is able to say, well, do I think that matters? Do I think that's important? Is that
Hmm.
something that is notable and important? So
Yeah. Or
then
did you consider this?
maybe there's another way to think about it, or some
Hmm.
information you don't know that would make that insight maybe less impactful.
Right.
So you can go back and tweak it. Okay, so that gets us through I and T, insight test. Okay, next step, next cycle, we add in the message. So that's M. This is where we're going to create a real succinct message, right? And we want that message to be super dialed in and relevant to the audience specifically that we're going to speak to. So first we have to think about, well, who is that audience? Think
Hmm.
about the main audience, or what we call the primary audience. Maybe there are secondary audience members, and even sometimes you might define a third phase or tertiary kind of level of audience members. And then what we want to do from there is brainstorm and research who they are. What are their
Hmm.
goals? What are they frustrated about?
Right, exactly. If you don't know what's relevant to the people you're speaking to, then how can you create a relevant message for them, right?
Hmm.
So you can use
Exactly.
that research to create some sort of message, a succinct, relevant message for your audience. And what I like to do is just put it in a very simple formula to start, because as you know, it's very hard to just start, get something down first. So I use a very simple formula, which is your insight. So you state your insight. Plus, then you add any helpful context to your primary audience. And then if you have a recommendation, you add that. So just start with that simple format. It's a good starting point where you can start testing your message to make sure it's relevant to your primary audience. So to test it, I would take that message and ideally share it with someone in my primary audience, but as we know, that's not always possible. So think
Right.
about whether you can find someone in your secondary or tertiary audience, or someone who knows your primary audience really well. That's also a good option.
Hmm.
And the few things I'm asking are, is this message relevant to you, or do you think it's relevant to the whoever's in my primary audience?
Hmm.
Is anything unclear or missing? Would a presentation about this help you make whatever desired decision or action? And these open-ended questions are going to help them help you uncover whether this message is relevant and actionable or worthy of a decision like you hope it is.
Right. So they're going to give you some feedback about all of this at this point.
Hmm.
And then so you can maybe not just revisit the message, but it's important to note that maybe you actually have to revisit the insight as well. So you get a
Right.
chance to go back and touch on both of those again and make sure you clear that gate and that you're feeling good about it, right? So
Hmm.
now we've got through I, M, and T.
Hmm.
We want to add the next one, P for plan. So plan, what are we planning? We're planning the narrative arc, the storyboard, the flow of the data story, step one, step two, message one, point two. How is this message going to build or unfold? And so this could involve sketching, this could involve slides, maybe whatever kind of your tool of choice is there, right, Allie, to kind of pull out the storyline.
Right. And I think this is a good point to bring up also the definition of a data story, because a lot
Hmm.
of times you think maybe I'll screenshot my dashboard and that's a data story. But we define a data story as a sequence of graphics that forms a cohesive narrative. So if you are going to have some sort of narrative, you're walking someone through your data, it's going to be through a series of steps, right? So this is really tough because you can present information in so many different ways. There's no
Yeah.
one right answer.
You can always
But
reorder it.
yeah,
You
you
can
can.
always come
Oh
up with
my
a different
gosh,
sequence.
an infinite amount of
Hmm.
sequences, right? But I recommend sequencing through your information in a way that your primary audience
Hmm.
likes to be communicated with. That's our main goal, not necessarily how I like to be communicated with, but how my primary audience likes to be
Well,
communicated
help me
with.
break that down though, Ali. Are there certain kinds of audiences? Like, how would I really kind of figure that part of it out?
Yeah, in my experience, I have found that there's three different ways people tend to like to be communicated with. So
Hmm.
some people like to be communicated with in more of an executive style. So maybe they want their recommendation right up front, right?
Just hit me with it.
Yes, just give me what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
cut to the
I'm busy.
chase. Hmm. Yeah.
And some people have more of an analyst communication style. They want you to start from the beginning, share all the details from start to
Hmm.
finish. Maybe I want the data set at the end too.
That's probably more me. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
kind of more getting into the nitty gritty,
Hmm.
not necessarily lost in the weeds, but I like to see the
Yeah,
richness
I
of what
really
the
want to see the
finding is.
details. Yep.
Hmm.
Yep. I know that about you.
That's number two. Okay, executive,
Yes. And
analyst.
then
What's the third?
the third one is more of an advocate communication style where
Okay.
sometimes they want to see more case studies and testimonials, more like the human side. How is this affecting our community? And we are obviously a mix of all three of these, but
Yeah.
usually you will find in yourself and other people, there's one or two that are a bit stronger. So in the
Hmm.
course, actually, we have a data storytelling on demand course that's coming out very, very soon. We recommend a couple of narrative sequences to start with for each of
Yep.
those communication styles so that you have the ability to just get started with a sequencing through these through your data story depending on your preferences of your primary audience. But it's really important to
Hmm.
know that you can mix and match these different narrative sequences, and you also have to test it. You might think that it is going to work out a particular way, but once you test it on someone, they'll help you figure out the things that aren't really hitting. So once you've sketched out sequencing your data story, like I'm going to talk about this point, then this point, you can ask someone in your primary audience, ideally, or maybe someone in your secondary or tertiary audience to look at how you've sketched out and storyboarded how you're going to um, show the flow of your data story and ask a couple questions. I show it to them and I ask, was there a point where you did not feel engaged, or maybe you felt
Hmm.
confused, or maybe you felt particularly engaged or interested in a particular part? And also ask, does anything feel out of order or even unnecessary to you? And that will help determine maybe I need to, like you said, put
Hmm.
the recommendation up
Hmm.
front, or maybe this part they thought, why is this even in here? This is so
Hmm.
unnecessary or not relevant to me. And it'll help you tone down, or maybe you need to flesh out a particular part of a data story a little more.
Okay, so they might say something like, "You lost me at this point," or
Hmm.
"I didn't see the jump from this thing you said to that thing you're going to say."
Right.
Or maybe they're saying, "Well, there's a missing piece of the puzzle that you've shown me. You're really not considering or including a certain angle that if you added that, it would really put the exclamation mark on it if you also incorporated that at the end, right?"
Yeah. Wouldn't it be nice to know that before the
Mm,
final, or you've spent all these time making
yeah.
all these charts?
Yeah, you left a piece of the puzzle out on the
Yeah.
table. Okay, so all this feedback, what is this going to do? It actually might bring you back to that insight again.
Yeah, it might.
And it might even lead you to find more data. Maybe there's that missing link. Maybe
Hmm.
your sequence is um, has a hole in it, right?
Yeah.
So that's IMPT, but we have two more to go. So let's add the A for align. So I think from what you've described to me, Ali, this can be a fun part where you get to, especially for those of us who are super visual,
Yeah.
where we try to align the chart type or the visual with each part of the message to
Hmm.
really make sure we're aligned on our visuals, that they're perfectly connecting to and lined up with that narrative we've created. And now you might have to use charts that are already made, or maybe you have to make your own, but you really are kind of thinking carefully about the chart type that is necessary for your presentation.
Right, exactly. And this is such a common misconception. I remember when I learned this, where you have your exploratory charts that you
Mhm.
use during your exploration and maybe when you found your insight.
Mhm.
But you also need to make your explanatory charts to explain your insight. Sometimes they're the same chart, but sometimes they're not. And that's okay. And that's normal and it makes sense. So we actually like to use the Financial Times visual vocabulary resource, which I'll
Yeah,
link in
it's
the show
amazing.
notes,
It's really
because
cool.
yeah, we love it. We use it all the time. I have it printed out because it shows a ton of different chart types that you can use based on the data relationship that you're trying to highlight. So, like, there's a bunch of chart types that show magnitude really well, or part to whole, or change over time. So, it's going to help you pick a chart type that highlights the message that you are really trying to convey at that particular time in your story. So once you have created your charts, share them with someone again in your primary audience if possible, or secondary, tertiary. And one trick that I like to do is I actually take the title out of my chart and
Hmm.
then I ask someone, what do you think the title of this chart should be? Because
Okay.
it
Yeah.
immediately unveils what part was
Mm.
obvious to them or what relationship they thought I was trying to highlight. And sometimes it's exactly what I was hoping for, and sometimes it's like, oh, maybe I need to rethink the colors or the chart type or something because what I was trying to convey was completely lost on them.
And it's very revealing because, yeah, maybe their eyes are going somewhere totally different. Who knows?
Hmm.
And you need to kind of direct it a bit. So that can be a very revealing answer. You know, what's popping out to them. And then maybe you think they'll see one thing. Hey, who knows? Maybe they don't.
Yeah.
Okay, so this last step, clarify, see. Now, this is sort of where we get in and we fine tune and we get all the things that are part of the story to be just kind of closer to perfect, right? So
Hmm.
it's a refinement. We're looking at design of charts. We're looking at maybe not even just the graphics or the annotations or the fonts or colors. We're even thinking also about ourselves and
Yeah.
how we're going to present. So, maybe you're going to be live in the same room with them. Maybe you're going to be on Zoom. Maybe you're presenting perhaps maybe in a report that gets submitted. So you're not going to talk to them. But if you are, this is where we actually think about the delivery itself as
Hmm.
well. So your tone, the loudness of your voice, maybe. What are the ways you're going to really get the message across to this audience? And this is the last mile, but it's make or break, right?
Yeah, it's the worst when you have spent so much time on a data story and then you're presenting it to someone and maybe you're speaking in a very quiet and monotone voice and they just completely, pick up their phone and start texting or something.
Yeah.
You're
And
like,
they tune
"Wow.
right out.
Yeah, what
Exactly.
a bunch
Yeah.
of what such a waste of time."
Hmm.
So we do not want that to happen. So
Mm-mm.
in the course, we talk a lot about some design tips, what I call the 80/20 of design.
Mm.
I don't have a design background, but the design tips that I have learned that you get a lot of mileage out of just some small tweaks. So when you're designing your chart and also your slides or maybe your report, you everything can be looking really clear and impactful for you, for your audience. But also thinking about, like you said, thinking about yourself, how you're
Mhm.
presenting. If you are presenting in person or on Zoom, you want to do your data story justice. So we have found that the way you speak is very important and it's
Mm.
something that you can practice and get better at because I was a terrible public speaker. But through lots and lots of practice, I
Yeah,
have gotten a
same.
lot better. And
Hmm.
this is
Yeah,
a
you
learnable
have.
skill. You're not born with it. I mean, maybe you're born with a little tendency, a little bit of talent, but you can learn this
Yeah,
skill.
you can.
So I definitely recommend practicing and getting feedback the way that you deliver your data
Hmm.
story because you want it to be crystal clear for your audience. You don't want them to be distracted by the way you speak. So, to test this,
Mm.
ask someone who will give you honest feedback. It doesn't need to be someone necessarily in your primary audience, but just someone who's going to give you honest feedback to watch your presentation. And what I like to do is have them rate from 1 to 5 how well you varied these 4 vocal levers that you can pull. So, you can change your pace, how fast or slow you spoke, your volume, how quiet or loud you are, your pitch, how high or low your voice was, or how often you pause. Sometimes you want to pause for effect. And
Hmm.
sometimes,
Hmm.
you want to speak a little bit faster and have fewer pauses. But these are just four levers that you can pull to make your speaking style to be varied. And it keeps people's attention really, really well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, I'm terrible at this, but it is so great to run through the presentation from beginning to end, maybe more than once, maybe.
Yeah.
And then actually not just doing it for the sake of doing it, but then also, again, here's that test piece of it, getting feedback
Yes.
in the dry runs, but not just that, getting feedback after showtime.
Yeah.
The actual presentation, you deliver it, you're done. Now you have another opportunity to test by saying, well, how did that go? So you can learn a lot. That'll really help you incorporate feedback for your next data story. And that's really, I think, where you will start to see continuous improvement if you kind of have the courage to ask the question, and have kind of a inner sense of security that even if someone has some constructive feedback, or even if what they say stings, then that just means you're going to be able to kind of get stronger and move forward.
Yeah, yeah. So that is the impact framework at a
I
very
love
high
it.
level, like how
So
you're
cool.
iterating, you're testing, and it matters because this
Hmm.
process is going to save you time and it's really going to help you avoid going down the wrong path before
Yeah.
you even realize it and having to redo everything after the fact. And it's that you don't want to be in that situation.
Yeah, and because you're constantly checking for relevance throughout this cyclical process. So then, well, when you get to the end, that final story, that's much more likely to influence your audience, have impact on them. You want to not just tell a great data story, right? What do you want to do? Drive a decision or an action, kind of create some kind of mutual or shared understanding.
Yeah. Yeah. And it actually builds trust too,
Hmm.
because your audience can sense when a story was crafted with them in mind and
Hmm.
you didn't just paste in a bunch of charts from Excel last minute and like, or maybe screenshot your dashboard and your hand waving through it. Like people can
Hmm.
tell that's
Been there.
not with them in mind. Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, Allie, I love this model you've created. It is so cool. I love the concept of applying this agile approach to data storytelling. You're creating something, it's a creative process. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it's a great way to do that. So, let's recap it, right? So, number one, what you're not thinking about doing here is building the whole thing all at once in some kind of a cave and then emerging, right? Instead, make it iterative, continually adjust, and get feedback from people along the way. And then to do that, you can rely on this impact framework. Okay, so what does it stand for again? I for insight, M for message, P for plan, A for align, C for clarify, and T for test. And so after each step, that T for test comes in. You do a quick test to validate, adjust, and then move on. Why is this good? Well, it's going to save you time. It's going to reduce frustration at a data story that doesn't land. And ultimately, it's going to help the quality of the final product. You're going to build a better data story if you go about it this way.
Yeah, and that's really all we want was to spend our time really well on creating a quality data story. And if you want to learn more about how to use the impact framework, we're in the final stages of creating our on-demand course all about it right now. Our launch date is early June 2025, so you can go to the show notes and add your name to the wait list so you will be the first to know when it's live. And if you're listening to this after June 2025, you can go to the show notes and it will be live and waiting for you to enroll in it as well.
Yep, and that's great for individuals.
Mhm.
Let's say you work on a team or your group needs this kind of a training. Well, we can set you up with that as well. Becky, my co-founder, she will get you all dialed in so we can do this live virtual. We can even get on site and do an in-person workshop if you want. So reach out to Becky. You can get her at contact@dataliteracy.com and we'll see what you need.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the Data Literacy Show. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who is also trying to get better at communicating with data.
And don't forget to subscribe so you're not going to miss the next episode. And you can find everything we mentioned today in the show notes at dataliteracy.com.
See you next time. Bye.
All right, bye everyone.